This episode contains discussions of rape, murder, and imprisonment. Listen at your own discretion. It is Saturday, the 1st of February, 2025. My name is Pigeon Rose, and this is my song of the day. Here we are once again talking about the Tragically hip. I just can't put those Canadians down. The Tragically hip. Much like Pringles, once you pop, you just can't stop. Today we're talking about a song of theirs called Wheat Kings. Now, most of their songs we've talked about so far have been kind of rockers, except I guess Pigeon. This song is a lot more low-key and contemplative, and it's based on a true story, which we will be talking about. I don't really want to give details about it until we listen to the song, I suppose, but I will just give you the base information in case you don't know about it. So you're listening with your head, you know. There was a guy called David Milgaard who was wrongly accused of a crime and in prison, and this song was written after he was finally released, after he had finally been exonerated of the crime. So there you go. It's on their album Fully Completely from 1992, which was the album that kind of boosted them into the mainstream, I think, at least in Canada. We've discussed all that before. Yeah, no, this is one of those ones where I liked it when I listened to it, but I didn't know the story behind it. And then once I heard the story behind it, and I kind of re-listened to it again from Beej performing it on Desert Bus, I think he did at some point, but also from watching the documentary, and they talked about the story, and I looked it up. This song deeply affects me now. It's a very interesting and sad story. We're going to listen to it now, and then come back in a few minutes and talk about it. And that was Wheat Kings by the Tragically Hip. Good Lord. I mean, if you don't know the story and you're not paying attention to the lyrics, it just sounds like a kind of a cool, calm, acoustic song. There's not much to it musically, although it's got a really nice melody. It's just nice, clean guitar playing, nice finger picking, and, you know, nice vocals from Gord. But once you start to read into the story and read into the lyrics is when it kind of becomes such a thing, you know? And it's Gord, so it's phrased in a really interesting way, you know? So, David Milgaard was a Canadian man who in 1969 was wrongfully convicted for the rape and murder of a nursing student named Gail Miller. He was only 16 at the time, and he happened to be staying in Saskatoon visiting his friend, and a woman was found dead nearby that friend's house. And because the police, you know, they wanted to actually fucking solve a crime, it's all just malpractice all the way down. They basically just started accusing these three teenagers who lived or who were living around here because they were stoners and they were teenagers and they needed to arrest someone, you know. So because he knew he didn't do it, he turned himself into the police to like try and clear his name, but they just sent him to Saskatoon, charged him with the murder, and then forced his friends to give false confessions, including making the friend who they were staying with say that he returned that night in blood-stained clothing. Because the police were like, I don't know what they would have said, but they were threatening them, like, you have to say this because this is what we want you to say. And so by the time he was actually convicted, he had turned 17 and he was sentenced to life in prison exactly a year after the murder took place. He tried to appeal several times. He was raped himself in prison. He attempted suicide in prison. He ended up in prison for 23 years. The whole time his mother was trying to clear his name from outside the prison, of course. And then they finally considered it. They checked the DNA evidence, they did everything they could, and they discovered that he was innocent of the crime, and he was exonerated of the crime and finally released. So it turns out the person who had actually killed her was someone who had been staying nearby. He was arrested after Milgaard was released. He turned out to be like a serial rapist. It was a whole thing. But they did finally catch the guy that actually did it, just like 23 years too late. And David Milgaard was released from prison. He married his partner. They had children. He moved to Alberta. He set up like various organizations and worked on these things to do like independent reviews of false convictions and stuff. He eventually died at the age of 69, 2022, from pneumonia. And then after his death, there was a bill introduced in his and his mother's name to make an independent commission to investigate potential wrongful conviction cases. It's just a whole long, sad, sordid story, and it's a hell of a thing to read about because this all happened, you know, before I was born, and then like, you know, he was eventually exonerated after I was born, but like I knew nothing about this. And can you imagine what that does to a person? 23 years in prison for a crime you didn't commit, especially a crime as extreme as what he was accused of. Oh, Christ. So let's go into the lyrics here, because not all the lyrics are about this, but mostly it's about it. So, sundown in the Paris of the prairies, wheat kings have all treasures buried, and all you hear are the rusty breezes pushing around the weather-vane Jesus. In his Zippo lighter, he sees the killer's face. Maybe it's someone standing in a killer's place. 20 years for nothing, well, that's nothing new. Besides, no one's interested in something you didn't do. Wheat kings and pretty things. Let's just see what the morning brings. So, Paris of the prairies is referring to Saskatoon itself. Wheat kings. Now, what does wheat kings mean in the title? That was something that always confused me about this one. Apparently, Western Canada is famous for its wheat farming, and the farmers there were known as wheat kings because they developed marquee wheat. And so it's just a reference to the people who farmed wheat in Western Canada, particularly Saskatchewan. And all you hear are the rusty breezes pushing around the weather vane Jesus. So he's talking about it being like a pretty low, quiet, mundane night. A weather vane, of course, is a thing usually you see on farms that tells you the weather by how it's moving and stuff. And saying the weather vane Jesus makes it sound like, it almost like makes you picture the weather vane being like the cross. I don't entirely know what he's going for there. The second verse, in his Zippo lighter, he sees the killer's face. Maybe it's someone standing in a killer's place. So the line here may be referring to them seeing the killer on the night and not knowing who he was, but the whole maybe it's someone standing in a killer's place seems to be referring to him seeing his own reflection, and so he sees the killer's face, quote unquote, because he was accused of being the killer. But of course it was someone standing in a killer's place. He wasn't actually the killer, right? 20 years for nothing, well, that's nothing new. Unfortunately, not an uncommon thing that someone is wrongly convicted of something. Besides, no one's interested in something you didn't do. That's the whole thing, is that this like quote here from a book. The most poignant and powerful aspect of the Milgard story is that even though Milgard had 20 opportunities for parole during his sentence, he did not once make a request for an early release. Because if he did that, he would have to have admitted to the crime. He would have had to have pled guilty, but no one's interested in something you didn't do. He didn't do the crime, so there was nothing he could have done. And then wheat kings and pretty things, let's just see what the morning brings. That sounds like kind of this hopeful message of like, let's see how it turns out for this guy. Let's see how it turns out for all of us, you know, because he's talking about wheat kings and pretty things being these like nice things among this awful story, you know. There's a dream he dreams where the high school's dead and stark. It's a museum and we're all locked up in it after dark, where the walls are lined all yellow, grey and sinister, hung with pictures of our parents' prime ministers, wheat kings and pretty things. Wait and see what tomorrow brings. So this whole thing about the parents' prime ministers, it notes on Genius that during his time in prison, there were 5 different prime ministers of Canada. That's how long he was in there. It's, oh, good Lord. But yeah, there's a dream he dreams where the high school's dead and stark. It's a museum where we're all locked up in it after dark, where the walls are lined all yellow, grey and sinister, hung with pictures of our parents' prime ministers. It sounds like it's kind of leaning into the surreality of him being in prison, like it feeling like high school or a museum, and just like his life all blurring together like this, you know. And then wheat kings and pretty things, wait and see what tomorrow brings. Again, just like hoping that something will change, right? And then the final verse, I'm gonna start crying now. It's always the Tragically Hip episodes. Late breaking story on the CBC. A nation whispers we always knew that he'd go free. They add you can't be fond of living in the past, because if you are, then there's no way that you're gonna last. Wheat kings and pretty things, let's just see what tomorrow brings. Wheat kings and pretty things, oh, that's what tomorrow brings. So the final verse here refers to David Milgard's eventual exoneration and release. Late breaking story on the CBC. The CBC is, of course, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and they showed the footage of him getting out of prison, right? Oh God, it says in Genius he spent 8,355 days behind bars. Jesus Christ. A nation whispers we always knew that he'd go free. I mean, it was obvious from the start for a lot, obviously not everyone thought he was innocent, but like, it seems that the vast majority of people believed he was innocent, and that a nation whispers we always knew that he'd go free. It's like this sigh of relief of like, finally justice has been done, you know? And then you can't be fond of living in the past, because if you are, then there's no way that you're gonna last. I mean, as it says on Genius here, it feels like this is reflecting on how, you know, he got free and that's great, but like, he was in prison longer than he had been alive when he went in. You know, he went in when he was 17 and he came out 23 years later. That would have ruined him, you know, that would have changed him completely. And you can't, it's the saying, you can't be fond of living in the past, because if you are, there's no way you're going to last. He has so little past to live in happily. He has to just live for the present, you know. Wheat kings and pretty things, let's just see what tomorrow brings. Wheat kings and pretty things, oh, that's what tomorrow brings. This final, like, you can imagine the clouds parting and the sun coming out, like, we made it to tomorrow. We can see these pretty things, and David Milgaard is free. Yeah. Heartbreaking story, although it is, like I said, it did ruin his life, but like it is nice that he finally did get justice, and it let him speak out for other people who were seeking justice, you know. It's a hell of a thing. Good Lord. I don't have much else to say about it. It's just a very emotional song and a very emotional story. I will not be shocked if a lot of people skip this episode, given the warning I put at the start of the episode. But if you listened, of course, thank you for listening. Yeah, it's not a song I can listen to a lot, I think. Not like presently, because I have to think about it, right? Anyway, that's going to be it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please hit like, hit subscribe, leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think. Tell other people about this show. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
Break it down.
There's not much to it musically, although it's got a really nice medley.